What if the most important muscle in your body wasn't your heart? What if the movement that keeps you alive more than 20,000 times every single day depended on a structure that most people never think about? Hidden beneath your lungs, separating the chest from the abdomen, lies a dome-shaped muscle that begins working before you are born and never truly stops until the end of your life. The diaphragm. A muscle so essential that without it, every cell in your body would quickly begin to fail. Because breathing is not simply about air entering the lungs, it is about pressure. And the diaphragm is the engine that makes that pressure possible. At first glance, the diaphragm appears deceptively simple. It looks like a muscular partition dividing the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. But in reality, it is one of the most sophisticated mechanical structures in the human body. Every breath begins with its contraction. When the diaphragm contracts, it moves downward. This movement increases the volume inside the chest. As the volume expands, pressure inside the thoracic cavity decreases. And because air naturally moves from regions of higher pressure to lower pressure, air rushes into the lungs. No muscles pull the air inward, no vacuum pump exists inside the chest. Instead, breathing depends entirely on the creation of pressure gradients, and the diaphragm is the primary architect of those gradients. When the diaphragm relaxes, it rises again. The thoracic cavity becomes smaller. Pressure increases, and air flows outward. This process repeats continuously. Thousands of times every day, millions of times every year, without conscious effort, without interruption. But the diaphragm does far more than inflate the lungs. It also serves as a mechanical bridge between breathing, circulation, posture, and even abdominal function. Its fibers originate from the lower ribs, the sternum, and the lumbar vertebrae, all converging toward a central tendon. This arrangement allows the diaphragm to coordinate movements across multiple regions of the body simultaneously, and that coordination is essential because breathing itself affects nearly every organ. At the center of this system lies one of the most remarkable principles in physiology: negative pressure. As the diaphragm contracts and pressure inside the chest falls, not only do the lungs expand. Large veins returning blood to the heart are also influenced. The pressure changes inside the thorax help draw venous blood upward toward the heart. In a sense, every breath assists circulation. The diaphragm acts as a secondary pump, helping blood return from the abdomen and lower limbs. This contribution becomes especially important during physical activity, when oxygen demand rises and blood flow must increase. Breathing and circulation are not separate systems. They work together, and the diaphragm is one of the structures that links them. The liver, stomach, spleen, and intestines are all affected by its rhythmic movement. With each breath, abdominal pressure changes slightly. These pressure fluctuations influence organ positioning, venous return, and lymphatic drainage. Even digestion is indirectly connected to respiratory mechanics. But perhaps one of the most overlooked functions of the diaphragm is its role in posture. Breathing and stability are deeply interconnected. When preparing to lift an object, maintain balance, or stabilize the spine, the diaphragm works together with the abdominal muscles, pelvic floor, and deep muscles of the back. Together, these structures form a pressure-regulating cylinder. By increasing pressure inside the abdominal cavity, they create stability around the lumbar spine. This allows movements to occur with greater efficiency and protection. In other words, the diaphragm is not only a respiratory muscle. It is part of the body's internal stabilization system. Even standing upright depends partly on its activity. The diaphragm is also remarkable from a neurological perspective. Its movements are controlled by the phrenic nerves. These paired nerves originate primarily from spinal segments C3, C4, and C5. Medical students often remember this relationship with a simple phrase: C3, C4, and C5 keep the diaphragm alive. Because damage to these segments can severely impair breathing, the phrenic nerves carry motor signals from the brain to the diaphragm, allowing rhythmic contractions to occur. But unlike most skeletal muscles, breathing is both voluntary and automatic. You can consciously hold your breath, speed it up, slow it down, or take a deep breath whenever you choose. Yet when you stop paying attention, breathing continues automatically. This dual control is possible because respiratory centers located in the brainstem continuously monitor carbon dioxide levels, oxygen concentrations, and blood acidity. Tiny changes in these variables trigger adjustments in breathing, long before you are consciously aware of them. In reality, the urge to breathe is driven less by oxygen and more by carbon dioxide. As carbon dioxide accumulates, acidity rises. Specialized receptors detect these changes and stimulate respiratory centers. The diaphragm responds almost instantly, increasing ventilation to restore balance. This constant feedback loop keeps the internal environment remarkably stable. But breathing is not identical throughout life. Newborn infants rely heavily on diaphragmatic breathing. Their rib muscles are relatively weak. As humans mature, accessory respiratory muscles become more involved. During exercise, the neck and chest muscles assist the diaphragm. During disease or respiratory distress, these accessory muscles may become highly active. Yet even then, the diaphragm remains the principal engine. Its endurance is extraordinary. Unlike many skeletal muscles, the diaphragm almost never rests. It contracts approximately 20,000 times each day, and does so for decades. To sustain this workload, its muscle fibers contain abundant mitochondria, large supplies of oxygen, and an exceptionally rich blood supply. Fatigue resistance is built into its design, because evolution could not tolerate a respiratory muscle that tires easily. But the diaphragm is not perfectly symmetrical. The right dome sits slightly higher than the left, mainly because of the liver beneath it. Openings within the diaphragm allow major structures to pass between the chest and abdomen. The esophagus, the aorta, and the inferior vena cava. These openings are carefully positioned so that breathing movements do not interfere with blood flow or digestive function. This balance between flexibility and structural integrity is remarkable. The diaphragm also communicates with the nervous system in surprising ways. Changes in breathing patterns can influence heart rate, blood pressure, and even emotional states. Slow, controlled breathing affects autonomic nervous system activity, increasing parasympathetic tone and promoting relaxation. Rapid breathing, by contrast, activates different physiological responses. This intimate connection between respiration and the brain explains why breathing patterns change during stress, fear, anxiety, or sleep. The diaphragm responds to emotions as much as it responds to metabolism, and this connection extends further. Its rhythmic movement influences lymphatic circulation. The lymphatic system lacks a central pump like the heart. Instead, it relies partly on muscular activity and pressure changes. Every breath generated by the diaphragm helps propel lymph through lymphatic vessels, supporting immune surveillance and fluid balance throughout the body. Even speech depends on the diaphragm. Airflow generated by its contractions provides the energy required for vocal cord vibration. Every conversation, every laugh, every song begins with controlled movements of this muscle. From an evolutionary perspective, the diaphragm represents one of the great innovations that enabled mammals to sustain high metabolic rates. Efficient breathing allowed greater oxygen delivery, greater endurance, and greater energy production, supporting larger brains and more complex behaviors. And despite all modern technology, no machine has ever replicated the elegance of its design. Because the diaphragm does not simply move air, it coordinates pressure, supports circulation, stabilizes posture, assists the immune system, influences the nervous system, and helps maintain the delicate balance that keeps every organ functioning more than 20,000 times each day, without applause, without rest, without ever asking for attention. Quietly, relentlessly, breath after breath, from your first moment of life to your last.